If you've got a Bible, I would like you to open up to Acts chapter 25. Acts chapter 25. You can find one. Good. Okay. Well, we are continuing in the book of Acts. We are in chapter 25, and we're continuing actually through Paul's literally trials. You know, we say, oh, he's got trials, you know, but Paul actually had trials, courtroom trials kind of thing. And you remember he'd been tried last week by Felix and his wife, and they were a governor of Caesarea. They were governing over the province of the Jews, and Paul arrived there, and of course the complaints were coming to him that you need to kill him, and of course there was no proof of anything that was ever Paul was accused of, but Felix himself decided that he was going to listen to Paul. So he actually had some time where he sat down with Paul, and his wife sat down with him and began to talk. And it says here in chapter 24, it says, several days later, Felix and his wife Priscilla, who was Jewish, sent for Paul and listened to him as he spoke about faith in Christ Jesus. So interesting, the governor wanted to get the lowdown. And so Paul began to talk about, not about Jewishness, but about faith in Jesus Christ. And it says that in verse 25, as Paul talked about righteousness and self-control and the judgment to come, Felix was afraid or trembled and said, that's enough for now. You may leave. When I find it convenient, I will send for you. So he got nervous. God was working in his heart. He started shaking in his boots because righteousness, Felix was not a righteous governor. You know, self-control, had no self-control, did whatever he wanted. And then judgment to come, meaning he's going to have to stand before judgment someday. He's accountable for his life. It says he began to tremble. He was afraid. And so rather than dealing with his fear, rather than asking more questions, what should I do? Rather than any of that, he decides that I don't want to talk about it. We're done. And he procrastinates. It says here later, it says, verse 26, at that same time he was hoping that Paul would offer him a bribe. So he sent for him frequently and talked with him. When 2 years had passed, 2 years. Every now and then he'd call in Paul, listen to him. 2 years had passed. He was succeeded. He lost his job to Porcius Festus. But because Felix wanted to grant a favor to the Jews, he left Paul in prison. Understand? He was there to be judged by Festus. Or by Felix. He was there. And Felix would not make a decision. You know, the Jews had brought him and said, we want you to kill this man. We want you to kill him. We can't kill him, but you can kill him. So kill him. And of course, he didn't find anything to kill him for. And rather than releasing him or listening to him and acting on his own behalf with Christ, his own life, he decides to just keep putting it off. 2 years go by, and he loses his job. And Paul is still in prison. Verse 25, or chapter 25. So now we've got a new chapter. It says, So there's a new governor in town, Festus. 3 days later, after arriving in the province, Festus went up from Caesarea to Jerusalem. Okay, so you remember Caesarea is the place where the Roman province capital is. All right? Jerusalem is the Jewish capital. Okay, and he is the governor of the Judea, that whole Jewish area. And like I said, no one wants to be governor of the Jews because they're always troublemakers for Rome. They don't like to fall in line. They don't act like other people. You know, they have a faith in God. They're very determined, and they are not going to do anything else the Romans do. And so they're always having this turmoil. So no governor wants to be governor of the Jewish group. But he is. And so actually he's going to try to do a good job. So he says, he gets there 3 days from the time he was installed. He goes to Jerusalem, right? I'm going to go see what my new province is like and go check in on the Jews. I'm going to their capital. It says verse 2, where the chief priests and the Jewish leaders appeared before him. Well, we're going to meet King Agrippa in just a little bit. King Agrippa he's over Festus. So he's got a little bigger area, which includes his. King Agrippa has the power to appoint chief priests. Not the Jews, the king. And so Festus has arrived at Jerusalem, and he's meeting, and it says he's there, and the chief priests and the elders come to him. Now, you would think on the very first meeting, what would be things that would be covered? We're going to get to know you, find out what's happening in Jerusalem. What kind of needs do you guys have? Do you have any complaints? How's things going in the city? And just kind of building relationships, and they're getting to meet Festus, and Festus getting to meet them. Look what it says. Okay, I'm going to start from 1. 3 days after arriving in the province, Festus went up from Caesarea to Jerusalem, where the chief priests and the Jewish leaders appeared before him and presented the charges against Paul. Wow. He's been in prison for 2 years. He hasn't even been in Jerusalem for 2 years. The very first thing they say to this new governor is, you need to deal with Paul. You need to kill him. You need to get rid of him. In fact, it says they have a plan. Verse 3, they requested Festus as a favor to them. Well, Governor, there is something you can do for us. We've got this guy. You've got this guy in prison named Paul, and we really like you to bring him down to Jerusalem so we can finish up a trial. We were kind of in the middle of a trial 2 years ago. They didn't say it didn't work out for them. They didn't say that Felix never made a judgment. But listen to this. It says, transfer him to Jerusalem, for they were preparing an ambush to kill him along the way. 2 years. The very first thing they are going to do is they're going to appeal to this new governor, Festus, and say, Festus, can you do us a favor? Could you, send Paul down here or up here to Jerusalem, and we're going to kind of investigate him a little further because it's kind of unfinished business. But that wasn't their plan. Their plan wasn't to investigate him. Their plan was to ambush and kill the guy. And notice who it is. It is the chief priests and the Jewish elders. It wasn't those 40 guys. Remember? We left off there was 40 guys who were planning to kill Paul. That's why he ended up in front of Felix. No. I don't know what happened to those guys. They made a vow that said that, they were going to eat or drink until they killed him. And of course, Paul's been gone for 2 years, so that's a long time to go without food and water. I think they probably bowed out on their vow. But the chief priests and the leaders, now it's their plan. Why? Why are they going to kill Paul? It's because of his belief in Jesus Christ as the Messiah. It's because he believed that Jesus died and rose again and appeared to him. That's why. And they made up all sorts of things. Oh, he's causing trouble all across the place. He's the leader of a sect of the Nazarenes. He was in the temple and he was desecrating the temple. No, none of that was ever true. But that was their false pretense. So that's their appeal to the new governor. However, Festus is he's not willing to go along with everything. Look at verse 4. Festus answered, Paul is being held at Caesarea, and I myself am going there soon. Let some of your leaders come with me, and if the man has done anything wrong, they can press charges against him there. It's like, I'm the governor here. You can come to me. Okay? You come to me. I'm going to be there in a few days. You want to come? You want to press charges? You come with me. God is always behind the scenes. Remember, I talk about providence, what God is doing, not miraculously, but behind the scenes, maneuvering things. And he's using even Festus as a new governor to kind of not let these Jewish leaders get their way so they can kill Paul. Okay, God doesn't want him dead. Verse 6. After spending 8 or 10 days with them in Jerusalem, Festus went down to Caesarea. The next day, true to his word, he convened the court and ordered that Paul be brought before him. Verse 7, when Paul came in, the Jews who had come down from Jerusalem stood around him. You can imagine, they're like kind of circling around Paul. Okay? And they brought many serious charges against him, but they could not prove anything. So, you're a judge. Your first court duty, basically on the job. The Jews come. They make all these charges against Paul, basically wanting him to get the death penalty. And it says that, but they couldn't prove any of them. So what do you do if you're a judge and you're in your court and no one can prove someone's wrong? What do you do? We dismiss the case, right? Because there's not enough proof. This man needs to be released. That would have been the normal thing to do. However, verse 8, Paul then made his defense. I've done nothing wrong against the Jewish law. Notice he says that. Okay, because they were making accusations about, he's not following Jewish law. Or against the temple, meaning I didn't desecrate the temple, I didn't do anything wrong. Or against Caesar. I'm not leading a rebellion. I'm not against the Jews, I'm not against the temple, I'm not against Rome. That's his defense. The prosecutors have no proof of anything they said, so there should have been a not guilty verdict. Should have been right there, him released and the case dismissed. Verse 9. Festus, wishing to do the Jews a favor. Notice, not justice. Wishing to do a favor. Remember, they asked us. They said, hey, could you do a favor for us? In fact, it says in the last of verse 25, it says, Felix wanted to grant a favor to the Jews, so he left him in prison. Then the Jews show up 2 years later and say, could you do us a favor and send Paul to Caesarea? We're not going to tell you this, but we want to kill him on the way. But could you do us a favor? It's all this favor things. We got to build relations. You do us a favor, we'll do you a favor. We'll be good Jews. We won't riot or rebel or anything like that. We'll just follow everything Rome says. And so there must have been some pressure there, because verse 9 says, Felix, wishing to do the Jews a favor, said to Paul, are you willing to go up to Jerusalem and stand trial before me there on these charges? Are you willing to go to Jerusalem, Paul? Paul's answer. He answered and says, I'm now standing before Caesar's court. Or I ought to be. I've not done anything wrong to the Jews, as you yourself know very well. He said, look, you listen to this. You know there's nothing here. Why should I go there? Why should you send me there? What's wrong with right here? Aren't we on court? They're here. I'm here. You're here. Let's just end this thing. If, however, he says, I'm guilty of doing something or anything deserving death, I don't refuse to die. But if the charges brought against me by these Jews are not true, no one has a right to hand me over to them. You know why Paul said that? Because he knew what the Jews' intentions were. They were not going to give him a fair trial. He'd already been judged by them twice. Remember, it ended in a riot both times. The Romans had to come rescue him. He says, I'm not going to get a fair trial there. I'm right here, right now. He says, and basically, if you're not going to do anything, then he calls a trump card. He says, I appeal to Caesar. Now, every Roman citizen had that ability. If you don't get justice here, you can appeal all the way to the Supreme Court, or in this case, the Supreme Ruler, and appeal your case. And so he makes that appeal. He says, if you're not going to judge, send me to Caesar. Send me to Rome. Now, Festus had a chance. He could have cleared this whole mess up right away. Now he's got a sticky problem. It says, after Festus had conferred with his council, right, he's like, what am I going to do now? So he gets his new council together, and he says, what should we do? And they get together, and he declares, he says, okay, you've appealed to Caesar you will go. He had blown his chance to have made a righteous judgment at that time. So it looks like now things are out of control. But I want you to know that things are not out of control, okay? I want to take you, I can do it now or I can do it later. I'll do it later. I got plenty of time this morning. But God is in the background maneuvering everything. And we'll see, and I'll take you back a little bit in history. It says that one of the commissions that Jesus gave to Paul, and Jesus gave to the disciples while they were living, it says that you will stand before kings. You will stand before rulers. You will stand before others in court. It's a prediction that they would do it. And they would be a witness in those places. Now, it doesn't tell us right here what Paul said. It sounds like he only said a sentence or two. But I want you to understand these abbreviated passages are not the whole story. Because we'll see this in just a minute, that Festus is now going to say, well, he talked about this and he talked about that, but doesn't show it here. So Paul was witnessing to Festus at the time. He was telling more about what he believed, more about what why he was there, than just these brief sentences. It sounds like, well, it happened in about 30 seconds. No, it didn't happen in 30 seconds. It took a lot longer to do that. So continuing, verse 13. A few days later, King Agrippa and Bernice arrived at Caesarea to pay their respects to Festus. Okay, now the King Agrippa is going to show up, and he's Jewish, I believe. And so he's got some Jewish roots there. So he understands a lot about all those kind of Jewish things, and we'll find out. And they arrived to kind of greet the new governor, and kind of settle him in. Since they were spending many days there, Festus discussed Paul's case with the king. He said, "There is a man here whom Felix left as a prisoner. When I went to Jerusalem, the chief priests and the elders of the Jews brought charges against him and asked that he be condemned. I told them that it is not the Roman custom to hand over anyone before they have faced their accusers and have had an opportunity to defend themselves against the charges." Now, that was exactly what happened in front of Festus. Festus made no decision. But he says, I inherited this problem. Verse 17, "When they came here with me, I did not delay the case. But I convened the court the next day and ordered the man to be brought in. When his accusers got up to speak, they did not charge him with any of the crimes that I had expected. Instead, they had some points of dispute with him about their own religion and about a dead man named Jesus who Paul claimed was alive." You see, we're finding a little bit more that was actually said. The whole story began to come out. Verse 20, "I was at a loss how to investigate such matters." No, it says, Festus wishing to do the Jews a favor. You see, he kind of glosses things over a little bit. He wasn't at a loss. He just passed the buck. He actually wanted to do the Jews a favor. He says, "I was at a loss, so I asked if he would be willing to go to Jerusalem and stand trial there on these charges. But when Paul made his appeal to be held over to the emperor's decision, I ordered him held until I could send him to Caesar." You see, there's a few pieces missing in there. Everyone wants to look good. You remember when the Roman commander sent him to Felix, he kind of left a few parts out. And the Jews left a few parts out. Everybody leaves it so they all look good. They all leave a few parts out. They don't put their failings in there. They just put in, well, they did that and this did that. And so the reason why he appealed to go to Caesar is because Festus refused to make a decision. Then King Agrippa said to Festus, "Well, I'd like to hear this man myself." He replied, "Tomorrow you will hear him." Okay, so now we got another trial. Now it's going to be King Agrippa and his wife as well. There's not a lot of justice going on, just a lot of trials. Verse 23, "The next day, Agrippa and Bernice," by the way, Bernice is his sister/wife, who leaves him and goes marry someone else, comes back to him. So there's a lot of incest and stuff going on in this relationship. It was very suspicious. So this is King Agrippa, though. They show up the next day with great pomp, and they enter the audience room. Now they're in the big room again, okay? So once more, they're back in the big room. And look who's showing up. So there's Bernice and Agrippa with high-ranking military officers, okay? So we're going to stack it with, all the military leaders and the prominent men of the city. Okay, so everybody's coming to this thing. They want to, they want to meet the king. They meet the new governor, and it's in this big room. So they're going to watch this trial. They're going to watch it all unfold in front of them. And everyone's going to be on display. At the command of Festus, Paul was brought in. Festus said, "King Agrippa, and all who are present with us," so he's making this big deal, "everyone, you see this man?" It's drama. "You see this man? The whole Jewish community has petitioned me about him in Jerusalem and here in Caesarea, shouting that he ought not live any longer." Listen to Festus. "I found he had done nothing deserving of death." When did you say that? You see, he's covering his back. He says, "I found, but because he made his appeal to the emperor, I decided to send him to Rome." You see, there's lies and stuff going on here. It's just, although he admits now he found nothing wrong with him, he could have cleared the whole matter up a couple days ago. Nope, didn't do that. "But because he made his appeal to the emperor, I decided I should send him to Rome." Well, I thought that was after you met with the council that you decided, because he didn't know what to do. Verse 26, "But I have nothing," here we go, "I have nothing definite to write to His Majesty about him." He goes, "I don't know what to say, because I know he's innocent. So that as a result of this investigation, therefore I have brought him before all of you, and especially before you, King Agrippa, so that as a result of this investigation, I may have something to write. For I think it's unreasonable to send a prisoner to Rome without specifying the charges against him." Oh, you better believe it's unreasonable. The emperor is going to think, what is this? Why is this man here? You don't even have a reason to charge him. So he's covering his behind right now. And all of this, and we say, "God, where are you in all of this?" Well, he's right where he always is, in control. We're going to see this now. 26. So Agrippa now takes over. "Then Agrippa said to Paul, 'You have permission to speak for yourself.'" Okay? So Paul motioned with his hand. By the way, he's like chains. He mentions with his chain. So he kind of does this, okay, I'm going to speak now. He motioned with his hand and began his defense. "King Agrippa, I consider myself fortunate to stand before you today as I make my defense against all the accusations of the Jews. And especially so because you are well acquainted with all the Jewish customs and controversies. Therefore, I beg you to listen to me patiently." Meaning, I've got a lot to say. It's going to take a little while. This is the longest recorded sermon of Paul anywhere. And it's, for us, it's a chapter, but it's really the longest he's going to speak. So he's going to make his defense. Now listen to what he says, okay? This is very important. Starts off, "The Jewish people all know the way I have lived ever since I was a child, from the beginning of my life in my own country and also in Jerusalem. They have known me for a long time and can testify, if they are willing, that I conform to the strictest sect of our religion, living as a Pharisee." Remember, true. He's a Pharisee. "And now it is because of my hope in what God has promised our ancestors that I'm on trial today. This is the promise our 12 tribes are hoping to see fulfilled, as they earnestly serve God day and night. King Agrippa, it is because of this hope that these Jews are accusing me. Why should any of you consider it incredible that God raises the dead? Now Paul's saying, listen, I'm a Jew. I'm a strict Jew. I've been a strict Jew. And the honest reason why I'm standing here is because I'm believing what was promised to us from the past. And he says, and it's all about Jesus. He says, why are you do you feel so incredible that God could raise someone from the dead? God can do anything. And by the way, Jesus wasn't the first one to be raised from the dead. You remember, there's been people raised from the dead in the Old Testament. He says, why is this so hard for you? I too, he says, let me tell you about myself. I too was convinced that I ought to do all that was possible to oppose the name of Jesus of Nazareth. This is when I was a Pharisee. And that's just what I did in Jerusalem. On the authority of the chief priests, I put many of the Lord's people in prison. And when they were put to death, I cast my vote against them. Understand who Paul says. This is Paul. He says, listen, I put them in prison. And many of them died because I put them in prison. And every time I affirmed that it was the right thing to do. He says, I cast my vote again. Verse 11, many a time I went from one synagogue to another synagogue to have them punished. That's where they gathered. Christians went to the synagogue. Why? Because they were Jewish people. That's what they did. They didn't have churches to go to. They went to the synagogue. So Paul would go to synagogues looking for those who would claim to follow Jesus and drag them out of the synagogues. And look at this next line. I tried to force them to blaspheme. Basically, he says, I tried to get them to recant of their belief and to say that Jesus is not God. Basically, I tried to get them to deny the truth of their belief. Blasphemy means to actually do something against God. And he says, they're following Jesus, who is God, and I'm trying to get them to reject following Jesus, who's God. Personally, I was so obsessed with persecuting them that I even hunted them down in foreign cities. On one of these journeys, when I was going to Damascus with the authority and the commission of the chief priest, he says, I'm a good Jew. I'm following the Jewish. I'm doing exactly what those Jews are accusing me of doing. That's me. They're accused. They want to kill me because of my beliefs. I was trying to kill them because of their beliefs. About noon, and I was commissioned by the chief priest. He says, about noon, King Agrippa, as I was on the road, I saw a light from heaven, brighter than the sun. Do you know it's the first time it says that? I mean, we've heard about light, but every time you hear the story, Paul throws in a few more details. This light was, can you imagine a light brighter than the sun? I mean, try looking at the sun. No, don't try looking at the sun. But many of you have done that. You've kind of glanced up there just to see if it really was bright, and you're like, I close my eyes and I can see the sun, right? But can you imagine a light brighter than the sun? That's what he said. He says, I saw a light brighter than the sun blazing around me and my companions. We all fell to the ground, and I heard a voice saying to me in Aramaic, in my own tongue, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? It's hard for you to kick against the goads. That's kind of an odd phrase, kicking against the goads, but really it was kind of an idiom, meaning, why are you fighting against God? Kicking against the goads, like fighting against God. Why are you doing this? He hears this voice who says, Paul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? Now, wait a minute. Was Paul after Jesus? No, he was after the Christians. You know what that means? If someone picks on you as a Christian, someone is picking on Jesus. That's how personal he makes it. That's how the Lord is connected to you and I. If someone's picking on you, they're picking on him. He says, why are you persecuting? Why are you kicking goats? Then I said, verse 15, well, who are you, Lord? I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting, the Lord replied. Now, don't you find it interesting that Paul, who's this guy who is against Christians, okay? He's against the Lord at this point, really. He's doing everything against him in the name of religion, but he's actually fighting against God. Don't you find it interesting that God takes the time to speak to that sinful guy? I mean, you think God would have just written him off. I said, man, I'm going to take this guy out. But no. He says, I'm going to take this man and I'm going to do some wonderful things through him. He's going to take this sinner and he's going to transform him into probably the most well-known Christian of all time. Probably. We still read about him today. And he says, I'm Jesus whom you persecute. The Lord said, now get up and stand on your feet. He's blind, by the way, but he says, get up. He says, now listen to this. I have appeared to you. Okay? He's saying, listen, to be an apostle, you're supposed to be able to see the Lord. That's one of the qualifications. And Jesus said, listen, I have appeared to you to appoint you as a servant and as a witness of what you have seen and will see of me. You remember in the book of Acts, the Lord has showed up a couple of times. Showed up when he was in prison, said, hey, Paul, don't be afraid. I'm with you. Showed up in Corinth in a vision, said, Paul, I got plenty of people in this city. Don't be afraid. I'm with you. And he keeps showing up. And he says, I stood there that first day, and the Lord said, you're going to be my witness, and you're going to testify the things that you've seen and things that you will see of me. Verse 17, I will rescue you from your own people, that's the Jews, and from the Gentiles. Now listen, he's telling this to all these rulers, all these military officers. And you know what he's doing? He's not really preaching. He's just telling his story. Some of you think that you have to be a good preacher to talk to someone about the Lord. No, you don't. All you got to do is tell what you know. Just tell your story. Just tell your story. God will do the rest. But Paul has a greater commission. He says, I'm sending you to them. Now listen to this. What is Paul supposed to do? He's supposed to open their eyes and turn them from darkness to light. What do you mean, open their eyes? Are they blind? Well, and so if you go to I'm going to take you to 2 Corinthians chapter 4, and listen to what this says. So it says, Paul is writing later on, or actually earlier. Well, he's writing later than when he wrote this, but when he said this, but it was earlier in his life. 2 Corinthians 4:3 says, and even if our gospel is veiled, meaning gospel meaning the story of Jesus, the story of salvation, the story of the Messiah, he says, even if it's veiled, it is veiled to those who are perishing. The God of this age, Satan, has blinded the minds of unbelievers, so they cannot see the light of the gospel that displays the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. For what we preach is not ourselves, but Jesus Christ as Lord, and ourselves as your servants for Jesus' sake. For God, who said, "Let light shine out of darkness," made his light shine in our hearts to give us the light of the knowledge of God's glory displayed in the face of Christ. You realize that people who do not know Jesus as Savior, unbelievers, are that way because Satan has actively blinded their minds. That's why you say, well, I'm going to tell them all about Jesus. Why wouldn't anybody get it? I get it. Well, you know why they don't get it? Because Satan has blinded their minds. There's a spiritual battle going on for those hearts. And you are not going to break that spiritual battle. But God told Paul, he says, you're going to go testify and you're going to help turn people, okay, from Satan unto God. Listen to this. I am sending you to them to open their eyes and to turn them from darkness to light, from the power of Satan to power of God, really, to God. Why? So that they may receive forgiveness of sins. Well, now wait a minute. You mean they may not have forgiveness of sins? Is it only through Jesus you get forgiveness of sins? Yes. And I must stop here. But I promise you, it's going to be strong when I come back. Okay, next week. It's going to be strong. Because we're going to talk about that and what it means. And Paul's going to continue his defense. Every one of us has a commission from God. If you don't feel like you've got a purpose and you know the Lord, I want you to read those verses yourself, okay? Those last few verses there, what was it, 17, 18, 19. Because as a believer, that's my commission too, is to turn people from darkness to light. I mean, the Lord has the ability to actually do a heart, but he said to Paul, you go do that. You witness, you tell your story over and over and over. So people can receive forgiveness of sins. Let me pray. Lord, this story has so much power in it. We barely scratched the surface. And I just pray, Lord, that as we go this week, we will realize that you still are behind the scenes. And that when people pick on us, they're picking on you. And that we have this treasured position in you because of our faith. We have forgiveness of sins because of our faith. We have a place in eternity because of you. I pray, Lord, that others would know the same thing, and I pray that we would stand firm in what you've done for us. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Go with the Lord, and he'll go with you. Don't forget your kids.